You are marrying a plumber. How embarrassing. My parents sneered. My sister laughed, asking, who would be caught dead at such a wedding? They turned their backs on me, and I walked down the aisle alone. But they had no idea that the man they mocked as a nobody was about to become the most important person in their lives on national television. My name is Maya, and at 29 years old, I thought I had reached the breaking point of humiliation. But the night my family met my fiancé was the night everything changed. Before I tell you how revenge tastes best when served cold, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe. If you have ever had to stand up to family members who judged you by your bank account instead of your heart. The air inside Maple and Ash was thick with the scent of wood, fired steak, and expensive perfume. It was the kind of restaurant in Chicago's Gold Coast where the lighting was dim, the music was soft, and the prices on the menu did not have dollar signs. My parents, Desmond and Patricia, fit right in. My father adjusted his silk tie, looking around the room to see if anyone important was watching us. My mother sipped her martini, holding the glass with a pinky extended, her eyes scanning the entrance with growing impatience. "He is late," she hissed, tapping her manicured nails on the white tablecloth. "This is exactly what I expected. Maya. People like him do not understand the value of other people." "It's time." I checked my watch for the 10th time. My hands were shaking under the table. Jamal was never late. He was the most reliable man I had ever met. But tonight, of all nights, something must have gone wrong. Just as I opened my mouth to defend him, the heavy oak doors swung open and the entire restaurant seemed to go silent. There he was, Jamal, my fiancé, the love of my life. He was not wearing a suit. He was not wearing the dress shirt I had laid out for him. He was wearing his heavy blue coveralls, the ones with the reflective strips on the shoulders. There was a dark smear of grease on his cheek, and his work boots left faint, dusty prints on the polished floor. I stood up, relief washing over me, but my mother gasped as if she had just seen a ghost. She actually recoiled, pressing her back against the velvet booth. "Do not come any closer," she whispered, her voice trembling with performative horror. "Do not let that filth touch the chair." Jamal stopped a few feet from the table. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were kind as they found mine. I could see the apology in them. "I am so sorry I am late," he said, his deep voice carrying through the hushed dining room. There was an emergency at the senior center on the south side. A main pipe burst in the basement. If I had not gone down there immediately, they would have been without water all night. I did not have time to change. He looked at my parents, extending a hand that was scrubbed clean but rough with calluses. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, it is an honor to finally meet you." My mother did not take his hand. She looked at the empty chair next to me, then signaled a waiter with a sharp snap of her fingers. "Excuse me," she said loudly, "bring a towel, or better yet, a plastic sheet. We cannot have him ruining the upholstery." The waiter looked mortified, but hurried to obey. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. "Mom, stop it. He is clean. It is just his work clothes." My sister Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She was sitting across from me, looking flawless in a dress that cost more than my first car. Her fiancé, Brad, a traitor who always looked like he was smelling something unpleasant, smirked beside her. "Oh, Maya," Chloe said, smoothing her hair. Extensions. "This is rich. You bring a plumber to Maple and Ash, looking like he just crawled out of a sewer, and you wonder why we worry about you." Brad chuckled, swirling his wine. "Look at the bright side, Chloe. If the toilets back up tonight, we have a man on site to handle it." Jamal slowly lowered his hand. He did not look angry. He looked at them with a calm, steady gaze that made Brad shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I am not here to fix the toilets, Brad," Jamal said quietly. "I am here to have dinner with my future family." Future family. My father Desmond finally spoke. He had not looked at Jamal once since he arrived. He kept his eyes focused on his steak knife, picking it up and inspecting the blade. "Let us be clear about one thing," he said, his voice low and cold. "You are not family yet. And looking at you right now, I have serious doubts you ever will be. Sit down if you must, but do not expect us to enjoy this meal." The waiter returned with a white linen napkin and awkwardly placed it on the chair. Jamal sat down with a dignity that none of them deserved. I reached under the table and squeezed his hand. His palm was warm and steady. "So Jamal," Brad said, leaning back and looking down his nose. "Tell me, is it lucrative digging through other people's waste? I mean, I assume you do it for the money because nobody would do it for the prestige. I do it because it is. Because it." "Necessary," Jamal replied, taking a sip of water. "Infrastructure is the backbone of this city, Brad. Without people like me, people like you would be drowning in your own mess." Brad laughed, a loud barking sound that drew stares from the surrounding tables. "I like him. He has spirit." Here Brad reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and flicked it across the table. It landed right in front of Jamal's water glass. "Go move my car to the front when we are done. Valet is busy tonight and $50 is probably what a half-day's work for you, right?" I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floor. "That is enough, Brad. Apologize now." "Sit down, Maya," my father barked. "It was a joke. Can you not take a joke? This is the problem with you, always so sensitive, always defending the help." "The help?" I stared at my father. The man who had raised me to be strong and independent was now reducing the man I loved to a servant because of his clothes. "I am an architect, Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "I design buildings. Jamal builds the systems that make them function. We are partners." "Partners?" My mother scoffed. "Please, you are settling. You are almost 30. Maya, and you are panicking because Chloe got engaged first. So you picked up the first man you found with a pulse regardless of his pedigree." The rest of the dinner was a blur of humiliation. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu. Seafood towers, Wagyu steaks, bottles of wine that cost hundreds of dollars. They talked over us, around us, and about us as if we were not there. They discussed Chloe's upcoming wedding, which they were planning at the most expensive hotel in the city. "It is going to be the event of the season," my mother gushed. "The flowers alone are costing $50,000. We want everything to be perfect for our Chloe." "And what about my wedding?" I asked quietly. The table went silent. My father wiped his mouth with his napkin and looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "We will not be contributing to your wedding, Maya," he said flatly. "What?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "But you paid for everything for Chloe. You paid for her engagement party, her dress." "That is different," my father said. "Chloe is marrying a man with a future, a man who fits into this family. We are investing in her happiness. You, on the other hand, are making a mistake. I will not spend my hard-earned money to turn our family into a laughingstock. If you want to marry this grease monkey, you do it on your own dime. Do not expect me to walk you down the aisle. I have a reputation to maintain." The cruelty of it took my breath away. It was not about the money. It was about the rejection, the message that I was worth less because of who I loved. The check arrived a few minutes later. The waiter placed the black leather folder in the center of the table. Usually my father would pick it up with a flourish, enjoying the moment of displaying his wealth, but tonight he just stared at it, then used one finger to slide it across the table until it rested in front of me. "Consider this a lesson in responsibility, Maya," he said. "If you want to live a blue-collar life, you better get used to paying your own way, since your fiancé is the working man. Let him handle it." I opened the folder. The total was $2,100. My stomach dropped. I had savings, but this was a huge blow. Jamal saw my panic. He reached into his pocket, his hand going for his wallet. I knew what he was about to do. He was going to pull out his black card. The card that revealed he was not just a plumber, but the owner of Hydrotech Solutions, one of the largest infrastructure companies in the Midwest. He was going to reveal that he could buy this restaurant and everyone in it. "No," I whispered, grabbing his wrist under the table. "Do not." He looked at me confused. "Maya, I can handle this." "I know," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "But I need to know. I need to know if they will really let me do this. I need to see how far they will go." I pulled out my own credit card, my hand trembling, and placed it on the tray. My mother watched me, a small smirk playing on her lips. My sister checked her reflection in her spoon. My father looked away. They watched me pay over $2,000 for a meal where they had insulted the man I loved and disowned me. They did not flinch. They did not offer to split it. They just sat there, secure in their cruelty. As we walked out of the restaurant into the biting Chicago wind, my mother pulled her fur coat tighter around herself. "Well, that was enlightening," she said. "Good luck with your pipes, Maya." They got into their luxury cars and drove away, leaving Jamal and me standing on the curb. Jamal wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close against his chest to block the wind. "You should have let me pay," he said softly. "I could have ended it right there." "No," I said, staring at the taillights of my parents' car fading into the traffic. "If you had paid, they would have only respected your money. They still would have hated you. Now I know the truth. And when the time comes, they will not just be surprised, they will be destroyed." Little did I know the opportunity for that destruction would come sooner than I thought, and it would involve a snowstorm, a broken heater, and national television. The drive back to our small brick rental house in South Chicago was silent, but the notification sound on my phone was relentless. It dinged over and over again, a digital assault that echoed in the small cabin of Jamal's truck. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the tears I had refused to shed in the restaurant. Our family group chat titled "Wilson Family Excellence" was exploding with activity. My mother, Patricia, had wasted no time moving on from the disaster dinner she had orchestrated. Just 20 minutes after leaving me on the curb, she posted a photo that made my stomach turn. It was my sister Chloe standing on a pedestal in a bridal boutique. She was wearing a Vera Wang gown that looked like a cloud of spun sugar and diamonds. The bodice was encrusted with crystals, and the train filled the entire fitting room frame. Underneath the photo, my mother had typed a caption that felt like a slap across the face. "Finally, a dress worthy of a Wilson woman. $15,000 well spent for our Princess Chloe. You look like royalty, unlike some people who settle for rags." I felt the bile rise in my throat. $15,000. They had just spent $15,000 on a dress for a wedding that was still months away. Meanwhile, I was struggling to put together a deposit for a simple off-the-rack dress from a consignment shop. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I knew I should not engage, I knew it would only bring more pain, but the injustice was a physical weight on my chest. I typed a message, my fingers trembling. "Mom, since you are in a spending mood, I need $500 to secure my dress at the bridal outlet. The sale ends tomorrow. It is the only one I found that fits without alterations." The response was immediate and brutal. It was not a text. It was a voice note. I played it, and my mother's voice filled the truck, sharp and dismissive. "Maya, do not be tacky. We are investing in Chloe's wedding because it is an investment in the family brand. Brad comes from a good family. This event will open doors for us. Your wedding to that plumber is a liability. Why would we throw good money after bad? If you want a dress, go to a thrift store. That is where your life is heading anyway." Jamal gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road and looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective anger. "Let me buy the dress, Maya," he said, his voice low and intense. "Let me buy you the most expensive dress in Chicago. I can transfer the money right now. You do not have to beg them." "No," I said, staring at the phone screen where Chloe was now sending crying, laughing emojis. I need to see this through. Jamal, if you buy it, they will just say, I am using you for money. They need to show me exactly who they are, and they are doing a great job. But the financial abuse did not stop with the dress rejection. A notification from my bank app popped up, alerting me to a low balance alert. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the app and navigated to the savings account I shared with my parents. It was a legacy account meant for their retirement, but I had been the only one contributing to it for the past 5 years, depositing 20% of my architect's salary every month to ensure they would be comfortable. I stared at the balance, $0 I scrolled through the transaction history, and there it was. A withdrawal of $40,000 processed 2 days ago. The description read, The Drake Hotel, Wedding Venue, Deposit. They had drained the account. They had taken my money. The money I worked overtime to save for their old age and used it to pay for Chloe's venue without even asking me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had eaten ramen noodles. I had skipped vacations. I had driven a car with a broken heater, all to put money into that account. And they stole it for a party. I called my father. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice loud and jovial in the background. I could hear clinking glasses. Dad, I said, my voice cracking. You emptied the retirement account. That was my money too. That was for your future. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maya, he said, sounding annoyed that I was interrupting his evening. We needed liquidity for the deposit. Brad's bonus is coming in next month and he will pay us back double. He is a genius with the market. Consider it a short-term loan. Besides, you should be happy to contribute to your sister. As happiness instead of hoarding money, like a miser. You stole from me, I whispered. We raised you, he snapped. We paid for your braces, we put a roof over your head. You owe us. And frankly, considering who you are, choosing to marry you probably will not need retirement money. You will be working until you drop dead just like him. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in the dark, stunned into silence. They had not just insulted me, they had robbed me, and they felt completely justified in doing so, but they were not done with me yet. A few minutes later, a new text appeared in the group chat. This time it was from my father again. Since you are so determined to live this blue-collar lifestyle, your mother and I have decided we need to intervene. We are coming to visit your little house tomorrow. We are bringing Chloe and Brad. Brad needs to see the reality of your situation, so he can give Jamal some pointers on how to be a real provider. We need to see if your living conditions are even sanitary. They wanted to come to our house. The small brick bungalow in South Chicago that Jamal used as a base of operations. They thought it was our permanent home. They wanted to come and sneer at us, to mock our furniture, to turn up their noses. At the neighborhood. Jamal looked at the message over my shoulder, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. Let them come, he said softly. Let them see exactly what they want to see. We drove the rest of the way in silence, plodding. The house was modest on the outside, but inside it was a fortress of technology. Jamal used it to test his smart home water systems. The water filtered through a system worth more than my parents' luxury car. The heating was geothermal, but to the untrained eye, it looked like a working-class home with mismatched furniture and exposed pipes. We spent the night making it look even worse. We put away the high-end electronics. We scattered some of Jamal's work tools on the coffee table. We made sure the fridge was stocked with generic brands. It was a stage set for their prejudice, and we were the directors. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that zero balance in my bank account. I felt the sting of my mother's voice, telling me I was a bad investment. I wondered how people who shared my DNA could be so heartless. Just as I was drifting off around 3 a.m, my phone lit up one last time. It was a text message from a number I did not have saved. It took me a moment to realize it was Mr. Henderson, the landlord of the bungalow we were renting. Mr. Henderson was a kind older man who had known Jamal for years. He usually only texted if there was an emergency. I opened the message, expecting a notice about snow removal or a package delivery. Instead, the words on the screen made my blood run cold. Ms. Wilson, I am very confused and frankly a bit disturbed. I just received a phone call from a woman claiming to be your mother, Patricia Wilson. She offered to pay me double your current rent if I would evict you and Jamal immediately. She said she needs the house to store wedding gifts and decorations for your sister because your apartment is the only place in the city cheap enough to use as a storage unit. Said you would be fine living in your car for a few weeks because you are used to lowering your standards. I told her no, but I thought you should know what your family is trying to do to you. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a thud that sounded like a gavel coming down. They were not just mean, they were actively trying to make me homeless. They wanted to throw me onto the street in the middle of a Chicago winter just to store centerpieces and gift bags for Chloe. I looked at Jamal sleeping beside me, his breathing steady and deep. They called him a nobody. They called me a disgrace. But they had no idea that the man they were trying to destroy could buy their entire neighborhood without checking his bank balance. I picked up the phone and typed a reply to Mr. Henderson, thanking him for his loyalty. Then I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to see how the other half lived. They wanted to see poverty. They wanted to see struggle. Fine. I would show them struggle. But when the tables turned, and they inevitably would, I would make sure they remembered every single moment of this betrayal. Tomorrow they would come to our house to mock us, but they would be walking into a trap of their own making, and I could not wait to spring it. The morning of my wedding day dawned gray and frigid, a typical Chicago winter sky that promised snow before noon. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but as I stood in the small, drafty vestibule of the St. Jude S. Chapel on the south side, I felt more like I was preparing for a funeral than a celebration. My dress was simple, a vintage tea-length gown I had found at a consignment shop for $300. It fit perfectly, but it was miles away from the Vera Wang masterpiece my sister Chloe would be wearing in a few months. I held a small bouquet of white roses, their petals already starting to brown at the edges from the cold. I checked my watch for the 100th time. 2:50 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled to start at 3. The chapel was small, humble, and inexpensive, exactly what we could afford without dipping into the savings account my parents had raided. But it was empty, not of guests entirely, but of the people who were supposed to matter most. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down, praying for a text, saying they were stuck in traffic, saying they were on their way. Instead, I saw a message from Chloe in the family group chat. Hey sis, just wanted to give you a heads up. We are not going to make it. Brad's biggest client invited us to the private golf club in Lake Forest for a round and dinner. Dad and Mom came along for the networking opportunity. You understand, right? This is huge for Brad's career. We cannot say no to money. Good luck with the plumber. Hope the pipes do not burst at the altar. Attached to the message was a photo, a selfie of the four of them. My parents, Chloe and Brad, holding champagne flutes on a pristine snow-dusted golf course terrace. They looked radiant, expensive, and completely unbothered by the fact that they were missing my wedding. I stared at the photo, my vision blurring. They chose golf. They chose a networking opportunity over walking their daughter down the aisle. They chose to support Brad's imaginary career over witnessing my actual marriage. A sob escaped my throat, harsh and jagged in the quiet vestibule. The heavy wooden doors to the sanctuary creaked open, and Jamal peeked out. He was wearing a simple black suit he had bought off the rack, but to me, he looked like a king. His eyes filled with concern as he took in my trembling shoulders and the phone clutched in my hand. They are not coming. Are they? He asked softly. Not a question, but a confirmation. I shook my head, unable to speak. I showed him the text, the photo. the casual cruelty of their abandonment. Jamal's jaw tightened. He took the phone from my hand and slipped it into his pocket. "Then we do this without them," he said firmly. "We do not need people who do not value us." "Maya, look in there." He pushed the door open wider, revealing the small sanctuary. Inside, about 20 people sat in the pews. They were not dressed in designer clothes. They did not have expensive jewelry, but they were there. There was Mr. Henderson, our landlord, wearing his Sunday best. There was Gloria, the waitress from the diner down the street who always gave us extra fries. And there were Jamal's guys, the crew he worked with every day. To my family, they looked like roughnecks, men with calloused hands and weathered faces, wearing suits that were perhaps a little too tight or a little out of date. But I knew the truth. These were some of the most brilliant infrastructure engineers in the country. The man in the second row with the gray beard. That was Dr. Aris Thorne, a civil engineering genius who designed the water reclamation system for half of Dubai. The woman next to him was Sarah Jenkins, the lead architect for the city's new underground transit project. They were Jamal's people. And today, they were my people too. I wiped my tears and straightened my spine. "You are right," I said. "I do not need them. I have you." Jamal kissed my forehead. "I will see you at the altar." He went back inside, and the organist began to play a simple melody. I took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. Walking down the aisle alone is a specific kind of pain. It is a physical manifestation of every rejection, every moment of neglect, every time you were told you were not enough. The empty space beside me, where my father should have been, felt like a gaping wound. The silence where my mother's sniffles should have been was deafening. But as I walked, I looked at the faces of the people who had shown up. They were smiling. They were happy for us. Not for our status, not for our money, but for us. And at the end of the aisle stood Jamal, looking at me with a love so fierce, it burned away the cold. We exchanged vows in that simple chapel, promising to stand by each other through poverty and wealth. Through sickness and health, I meant every word, especially the poverty part, because as far as I knew, that was our reality. After the ceremony, we gathered in the church basement for a modest reception, sheet cake and punch. It was nothing like the gala my sister was planning, but there was laughter and genuine warmth. I pulled out my phone one more time, unable to help myself. I opened Instagram, and there it was. A live stream notification from Chloe, live from Lake Forest, celebrating the good life. I clicked on it. The video showed Chloe and my mother laughing in the back of a luxury SUV. "We are just leaving the club," Chloe narrated, holding the phone high to get her best angle. "Such an amazing day, rubbing elbows with the elite. You know, you have to surround yourself with success to be successful. Unlike some people who settle for mediocrity and marry into the help." She giggled, and my mother chimed in from the background. "Oh, stop it, Chloe. Be nice, even if it is true. We are just glad we dodged that bullet. Imagine the smell in that church." Comments were rolling in, mostly from their social climber friends, laughing emojis, hearts, validations of their cruelty. "Avoid the toxic vibes, girl. You deserve the best." One comment read, "Stay away from the loser wedding." I closed the app, my hands shaking with rage. They were not just absent, they were publicly mocking me. They were broadcasting their disdain to the world. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Jamal. He had watched the video over my shoulder, his face unreadable. "Let it go, Maya," he said quietly. "They are digging their own graves." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "But it hurts, Jamal. It hurts to be the punchline of their joke." He took my hand and led me away from the noise of the reception, out the back door into the snowy parking lot. The winter air was biting, but it felt clean, cleansing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. Was this a late wedding gift? He opened it. Inside was a key. A heavy, old-fashioned brass key that looked like it belonged to a castle. "What is this?" I asked. "This is home," Jamal said, his eyes searching mine. "Maya, I cannot watch them treat you like this anymore. I cannot let you live in that drafty bungalow thinking we are poor, thinking you have to beg for scraps. It is time. We need to go home." I looked at the key, then at him. I knew what he meant. He wanted to take me to the penthouse, the one he owned in the city, the one I had never seen but knew existed. He wanted to reveal who he really was, to wrap me in the luxury and security he had earned. It was tempting. God, it was tempting to just drive to my parents' house, throw this key on their table and scream that my husband was worth more than their entire country club. But then I thought about the text messages, the stolen retirement money, the sneers, the way they looked at Jamal like he was dirt. If we revealed the truth, now they would change. They would apologize. They would fawn over us. They would love Jamal's money, not Jamal. And I would never know if they actually respected us or just our bank account. "No," I said, closing his hand over the key. "Not yet." Jamal looked frustrated. "Maya, why? They are monsters. You do not owe them this charade." "I know," I said, looking back at the church where our ragtag group of friends was celebrating us. "But I need to know, Jamal. I need to know how far they will go. I need to see the bottom of their cruelty, because if I stop it now, they will just say they were stressed or busy or misunderstood. I need them to show me who they really are when they think we have nothing." I took the key from his hand and slipped it into my pocket. "We will use this," I promised. "Soon. But not tonight. Tonight we go back to the bungalow. Tonight we are the plumber and his wife, and tomorrow we see what they do next." Jamal sighed but nodded. He understood. He wrapped his arms around me and kissed me, the snow falling around us like confetti. "Okay, Mrs. Wilson," he said, using his last name. "We play the long game, but I promise you when the time comes the reveal will be spectacular." I smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "Spectacular is an understatement, Jamal. It is going to be apocalyptic." We got into his beat-up truck and drove away from the church, leaving the key in my pocket and the truth hidden for just a little longer. The snow was falling harder now, burying the city in white, and somewhere in a luxury hotel my family was toasting to their own superiority, unaware that the ice they were standing on was about to crack wide open. The small brick bungalow on the south side of Chicago was not much to look at from the outside. The paint was peeling slightly around the window frames, and the front stoop had a crack running down the middle. It was the kind of house that blended into the background of a working-class neighborhood, exactly as Jamal intended. It was his sanctuary, his lab, his quiet place away from the demands of running a billion-dollar empire. But to my parents, it was a symbol of my failure. I stood in the narrow hallway, my heart pounding as I watched them pull up to the curb. My father's luxury SUV looked absurdly out of place next to the rusted chain-link fence of our neighbor's yard. My mother stepped out first, clutching her purse to her chest as if she expected to be mugged the moment her heels touched the cracked sidewalk. Chloe followed, wearing oversized sunglasses and a look of pure disgust. Brad brought up the rear, checking his reflection in the car window before striding toward the house like he owned the entire block. "Showtime," I whispered to Jamal, who was sitting on our worn-out couch flipping through a trade magazine. He looked up and winked. "Do not worry, babe. The water filter system is hidden. The smart thermostat is covered with a calendar, and I left some dirty work boots by the door for ambiance." I opened the door just as my mother raised her hand to knock. She froze, her eyes darting around the small living room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the scuffed floorboards, and the distinct lack of designer. Anything. "Oh, Maya," she breathed, stepping inside and immediately covering her nose with a scented handkerchief. "It smells like mildew and desperation in here. It is just old wood." "Mom," I said, closing the door behind them. "Welcome to our home." My father snorted, looking around with open disdain. "This is not a home. Maya, this is a kennel. How can you live like this? You are an architect. You design skyscrapers, and you live in a place that looks like it should be condemned." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "We like it. It is cozy, and the rent is affordable, which is important since we are saving up." Saving up. Chloe laughed, walking over to inspect a bookshelf filled with paperback novels. Saving up for what? A better cardboard box. Seriously. "Maya, this is embarrassing. I told my friends you were doing charity work living here to understand the plight of the poor. I could not tell them my sister actually lives in a dump." Brad sauntered into the room, his eyes scanning the space with a predator's gaze. He did not look at me. He looked straight at Jamal, who had stood up to greet them. "So this is the castle," Brad sneered. "Nice touch with the duct tape on the window frame." "Very rustic. It keeps the draft out," Jamal said, his voice calm and steady. "Can I get anyone some water?" "It is tap, but it is clean." My mother looked horrified. "Tap water in Chicago? Are you trying to poison us?" "No, thank you. We brought our own." She pulled a bottle of imported sparkling water from her oversized bag and took a sip, her eyes never leaving the stain on the rug, a stain we had carefully created with coffee grounds just this morning. "We are not staying long," my father announced, refusing to sit down on the couch. "I do not want to pick up bedbugs. We just came to drop off the invitation for Chloe Ali's housewarming party." He handed me a heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. "We finally closed on the penthouse," Brad said, puffing out his chest. $3 million top. Floor of the new Millennium Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Private elevator. Concierge service. It is going to be spectacular. $3 million, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. That is impressive, Brad. Especially for a trader who has only been in the city for 6 months. Brad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "You know how it is. Maya, high risk, high reward. I made a killing on the futures market last week, doubled my portfolio overnight. You should try it sometime. Jamal, maybe you could invest your plumbing tips. I could turn that $50 into $100 in no time." Jamal smiled a slow, lazy smile. "I prefer tangible assets. Brad pipes, concrete water. Things I can touch. The market is too volatile for me." My mother scoffed. "Volatile. Please. It is called sophistication. Jamal, something you clearly know nothing about. Brad is building a legacy. You are fixing leaks." Chloe looped her arm through Brad's, beaming up at him. "We are going to have the best view in the city. Maya. You should come see it sometime. Maybe you can get some inspiration for when you finally decide to leave this hole. Although I doubt you will ever be able to afford a place like ours." My father shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "You know, Maya, you were always the smart one, top of your class scholarships awards. And look at you now. Living in a squalid little shack, married to a man who works with his hands. It is a tragedy, really. You are the disgrace of the Wilson line." "The disgrace?" The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my graduation, and I saw nothing but judgment. He did not see his daughter. He saw a reflection of his own insecurities. "I am happy, Dad," I said quietly. "Does that not matter?" "Happiness does not pay the bills," my mother snapped, "and it certainly does not get you invited to the right parties. Do you know what people are saying about you? They are saying you lost your mind. They are saying you had a breakdown. We have to make excuses for you constantly. It is exhausting. Then stop, I said. Stop making excuses. Stop talking about me at all. If I am such an embarrassment, pretend I do not exist. It seems like you are already doing a good job of that. My father's face turned red. You ungrateful little, we are trying to help you. We are trying to shame you into having some self-respect, but clearly you are too far gone. He turned to the door. Come on, Patricia Chloe. We are leaving. I cannot breathe in here anymore. They filed out like royalty leaving a peasant's hovel. My mother paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. Do not bother coming to the housewarming, she said coldly. Unless you plan to cater it, you would not fit in anyway. I watched them walk to the car, my heart numb. But Brad lingered behind. He waited until they were safely in the vehicle, then turned back to Jamal, who was standing on the porch. Hey, buddy, Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, I know things are tight for you guys, and I am a generous guy. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, but he did not hand it over immediately. I have a side hustle, Brad said, glancing around as if checking for spies. Crypto big returns guaranteed. But you need capital. Entry level is $5,000. I know that is a lot for a guy like you, but I know a guy. A loan shark, basically. But he is legit. High interest. But if you pay him back after my crypto tip pays out, you will be swimming in cash. What do you say? Want to change your life? Jamal looked at the card, then at Brad's eager, sweaty face. It was a scam, a classic pyramid scheme wrapped in buzzwords and desperation. Brad was not rich. He was drowning, and he was trying to drag us down with him, to use us as a life raft. I think I will pass, Brad. Jamal said, his voice flat. I am happy with my life, Brad sneered. Suit yourself. Enjoy the poverty. He turned and jogged back to the car, hopping in beside Chloe. The SUV roared to life and sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the cold winter air. I looked at Jamal, and for the first time that day, I laughed. It was a dark, bitter laugh, but it was real. He tried to scam you, I said, shaking my head. He is living in a rented penthouse, pretending to be a millionaire, and he tried to scam the actual billionaire for $5,000. Jamal picked up the business card Brad had dropped on the porch railing. He flicked it into the bushes. He is desperate, Jamal said. And desperate men make mistakes. He just made his biggest one. What do you mean? He offered me a loan shark. Maya, Jamal said, walking back into the house. Which means he is using one. And if he is using a loan shark to fund his lifestyle, that house of cards is about to come crashing down. And when it does, we will be there to watch it fall. I followed him inside, closing the door on the cold and the cruelty of my family. We were alone again in our fake little house, but the war had officially begun, and unlike them, we knew exactly who the enemy was, and exactly how much ammo they had left, which was nothing, absolutely nothing. The stack of papers on my father's mahogany dining table looked innocent enough until I saw the bank logo and the words, Home Equity Line of Credit, stamped in bold red letters. My father Desmond was signing his name with a flourish that made me nauseous, while my mother Patricia stood over him, practically vibrating with excitement. $300,000, she whispered reverently. It is going to be the most magnificent wedding Chicago has ever seen. The flowers alone will outshine the botanical gardens. I stood in the doorway of the dining room, feeling the blood drain from my face. I had come over to drop off a box of old photos my mother had demanded for a slideshow, but now I felt like I had walked into a crime scene. Dad, what are you doing? I asked, stepping into the room. You own this house outright. You paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. Why are you taking out a loan against it now? My father did not even look up. He passed the pen to my mother, who signed her name with equal enthusiasm. It is called leverage. Maya, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Something you would understand if you had married a financier instead of a laborer. Brad has a guaranteed deal closing next week. He told us if we give him the capital now, he can double it before the reception. We are not just paying for the wedding, we are making a profit. I stared at them, unable to comprehend the sheer stupidity of what I was hearing. They were risking their home, the only asset they truly owned, on the word of a man who rented a penthouse he could not afford, and tried to scam my husband with a loan shark scheme. Dad, that is not how investing works, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There is no such thing as a guaranteed double return in a week. That is a Ponzi scheme. He is using you. My mother slammed her hand down on the table, startling me. You are jealous, she hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. You are green with envy. Because Chloe found a man who can multiply money while you found one who plays in sewage, you cannot stand the fact that your sister is going to have a wedding that costs more than your entire life's earnings. It is not jealousy. Mom, it is math, I pleaded, ignoring the insult. You are putting your house on the line for a party. What happens if the deal falls through? What happens if he loses the money? You will be homeless. He will not lose it, my father snapped, handing the papers to a courier who had been waiting in the hall. Brad showed me the projections. He is a genius. This is why he is wealthy, and you are living in a shack. Now stop bringing your negative energy into this house. We have planning to do. I watched the courier leave with the deed to their home, and I felt a heavy stone settle in my stomach. They were gone. They were so blinded by the flash of Brad's fake wealth and the promise of social status that they had severed their connection to reality. Just then, Chloe breezed into the room holding a garment bag that looked like it contained a body. She was glowing with the manic energy of a bride who had been given a blank check. "Oh, good, you are here," Chloe said, spotting me. "I need you to try this on." She unzipped the bag and revealed the most hideous dress I had ever seen. It was a floor-length gown made of a shiny synthetic taffeta in a color that could only be described as radioactive swamp slime. It was ruffled at the shoulders and had a strange asymmetrical hemline that looked like a mistake. "What is that?" I asked, recoiling. "It is your bridesmaid dress," Chloe beamed. "Isn't it unique? The color is called chartreuse. Surprise! I had it custom made because I could not find anything off the rack that captured my vision." "Your vision was to make me look like a nauseous caterpillar?" I asked Chloe. S smile turned brittle. "Listen, Maya. I am doing you a huge favor by even letting you be in the wedding party after that. Embarrassment at the restaurant. Brad wanted to ban you, but I said no, she is my sister. But I need to make sure the aesthetics remain elevated. You are, let us face it, a bit plain. And with your husband sitting at the back table, I do not want you drawing attention away from me. This dress ensures that all eyes stay where they belong, on the bride." She shoved the dress into my arms. "Put it on. I need to see if it needs to be taken in. Although with the stress eating you have probably been doing, we might need to let it out." I went to the powder room and put on the dress. It was worse than I imagined. The material scratched my skin, and the fit was intentionally unflattering, tight in the wrong places and loose where it should have been fitted. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what Chloe wanted to see. A clown, a joke, a prop to make her look even more beautiful by comparison. When I walked out, my mother clapped her hands. "Perfect," she declared. "You blend right into the background. It is exactly what we needed." Chloe walked around me, tugging at the fabric and pinning it in places that made it difficult to breathe. "Do not wear heels," she instructed. "I do not want you looking tall. Flats only. And maybe wear your hair up, but messy, you know, like you just did not have time to do it." I stood there in that $400 monstrosity paid for by my parents' second mortgage, and I realized that this was not just about a wedding. This was a ritual humiliation. They needed me there, not because they loved me, but because they needed someone to look down on. They needed a baseline to measure their own perceived greatness against. "I will wear it," I said quietly, meeting Chloe's gaze in the mirror. "But I am not doing it for you." Chloe laughed. "Of course you are. You are doing it because you are desperate to be part of this world. even if it is just as a servant. Later that afternoon, the house was buzzing with wedding planners, florists, and caterers. My parents were signing checks with abandon, acting like royalty holding court. I felt suffocated by the excess and the delusion. I needed a moment of silence, so I slipped away toward the back of the house near the guest powder room. As I turned the corner into the hallway, I heard a voice. It was low, urgent, and coming from inside the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. I froze. It was Brad. "Yeah, babe," I know he was saying, his voice echoing slightly off the tiles. "It is done. The idiots signed the papers today. I should have the cash in my account by Friday morning." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who was he talking to? It certainly was not Chloe. She was in the living room, arguing about napkin folds, 300 grand from the house, plus the cash gifts from the wedding registry. Brad continued with a dark chuckle. "It is going to be a massive haul. I already booked the flight to Rio for the night of the wedding." One way, obviously. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. He was confessing everything Jamal and I suspected was true. He was not investing their money. He was stealing it, and he was planning to disappear the moment the reception ended, leaving my sister abandoned and my parents homeless. "They are so stupid it actually hurts," Brad said, his tone dripping with contempt. "The old man thinks he is some kind of business tycoon, but he handed over the deed to his house like a puppy begging for a treat. And Chloe? God, she is so obsessed with being a princess. She has not looked at a single bank statement. I could rob them blind right in front of their faces, and they would thank me for it." I heard the sound of the toilet flushing and the faucet turning on. I scrambled backward, retreating silently down the hallway before he could emerge. My mind was racing. I had the truth now. I had the confirmation. But who would believe me? If I ran into the living room right now and screamed that Brad was a thief, they would call me a liar. They would say I was jealous. They would say I was trying to ruin Chloe's big day because I was miserable in my own life. They were too invested in the lie to accept the truth. I realized with a chilling clarity that I could not save them. Not yet. They had to fall. They had to hit the bottom so hard that the impact would shatter their delusions. I walked back into the living room, where my mother was holding up 2 different shades of cream-colored cardstock. "Maya," she called out, seeing me. "Which one says old money to you? The ecru or the ivory?" I looked at her, at the woman who had just mortgaged her future for a con artist. I looked at my sister, who was marrying a man who despised her. I looked at my father, who was bankrupting himself for an ego boost. "I think the ivory," I said, my voice calm and hollow. "It looks like a blank slate." "Perfect," my mother said, tossing the other sample aside. "See? You can be useful when you try." I smiled a tight, grim smile. "Use me while you can, Mom," I thought. "Because when this house of cards falls, I am the only one who is going to be left standing, and I am not sure I will be there to catch you." The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a spectacle of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers that seemed to vibrate with the sheer cost of the evening. The air smelled of expensive lilies and the desperation of my parents who had mortgaged their twilight years to pay for this night, watching them hold court near the ice sculpture that had been carved into the shape of a bull and bear, symbolizing Brad's supposed Wall Street prowess, made my chest ache with a heavy, suffocating pressure. They were beaming, shaking hands and laughing, the perfect image of high society parents, unaware that they were standing on the edge of a financial cliff. I adjusted the straps of the hideous chartreuse bridesmaid dress Chloe had forced me to wear. The synthetic taffeta scratched against my skin like sandpaper, a constant physical reminder of my submission. I caught a glimpse of myself in a gilded mirror and saw exactly what my sister had intended. I looked like a court. I looked. Jester, a neon distraction designed to make her white lace elegance pop even brighter. By comparison, Jamal stood beside me looking handsome in his own suit, despite the fact that my father had loudly asked him earlier if he had rented it from a costume shop. Jamal's hand was a warm, steady weight on the small of my back, anchoring me as we navigated the sea of round tables draped in silk. We searched for our table number, scanning the calligraphy cards in the center of the floral arrangements. Table 1 was the head table. Obviously. Table 2 through 10 were reserved for family and Brad's high-profile clients. We kept walking past table 20, past the dance floor, past the orchestra pit, until we reached the very back of the room. There it was, table 45. It was shoved into a dark corner partially obscured by a large decorative column. But worst of all, it was situated directly next to the swinging doors of the service entrance and the hallway leading to the restrooms. The placement was so deliberate, it felt like a physical slap. Every time a waiter burst through the service doors with a tray of dirty dishes, the clatter drowned out the music. Every time a guest opened the restroom door, the scent of industrial air freshener and faint sewage wafted over our setting. We sat down the metal chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Unlike the padded velvet chairs at the other tables, ours were simple folding chairs covered in thin white fabric. The other occupants of the table looked up at us with tired, apologetic smiles. To my left was the wedding photographer who was frantically backing up photos on his laptop. To my right was the limo driver who was checking his watch and eating a bread roll he had smuggled from a passing tray. So this is where they put the family. Jamal whispered, his voice devoid of surprise but heavy with disappointment. This is where they put the help, I corrected him, fighting back the tears that threatened to ruin my makeup. I am not family tonight, Jamal, I am. A prop, I am the ugly bridesmaid, sitting in the corner, reminding everyone that even the Wilsons have a black sheep. The dinner service began with a fanfare of trumpets, waiters streaming out of the kitchen carrying silver trays. The menu was decadent. Lobster thermidor filet mignon with truffle butter and a risotto that smelled of saffron and wealth. I watched as my parents at the head table were served, first their faces glowing in the candlelight as they clinked crystal goblets. The waiters moved efficiently through the room, placing plates of steaming luxury in front of the guests. But as the service wave reached the back of the room, it seemed to break and recede before it hit table 45. The photographer and the driver were handed boxed meals wrapped in cellophane cold turkey sandwiches and a bag of chips. They accepted them with the resignation of people who were used to being an afterthought at these events. Then the waiter, a young man who looked terrified, approached us. He held 2 plates, but they were not the porcelain china used for the other guests. They were heavy-duty plastic, the kind you might see at a high school cafeteria. On the plates was not lobster, not steak. It was a scoop of gray-looking pasta that had clearly been sitting out too long, and a piece of rubbery chicken that looked like it had been boiled without seasoning. I am so sorry, the waiter whispered, his face flushing red. I was given strict instructions by the bride, she said. The special menu was only for the main tables, and that the vendor table was to receive the standard staff meal. I looked down at the cold pasta. The humiliation was so complete, so thorough, that I felt numb. This was not about saving money. The cost of 2 extra plates of lobster in a $300,000 wedding was negligible. This was about hierarchy. This was a message sent on a plastic plate. Jamal did not look at the food. He looked at the waiter with a calm intensity that made the young man flinch. "Thank you, Jamal," said his voice smooth and polite. "You are just doing your job." The waiter nodded and scurried away, relieved to escape the radius of our shame. "I cannot believe she did this," I whispered, pushing the plate away. "My own sister. She feeds strangers lobster and feeds us scraps." Jamal reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Do not eat it, Maya. We will go to the diner afterwards. We will get burgers and shakes and celebrate our own way. Do not give them the satisfaction of watching you choke this down." I nodded, grateful for his strength. but I could see the guests at the nearby tables glancing at us, whispering behind their hands. They saw the plastic plates. They saw the corner table. They saw the plumber and the outcast, and they were judging us exactly as Chloe intended. Just then, the crowd parted and my sister appeared. She was floating through the room in her $15,000 dress. A glass of champagne in one hand and her new husband Brad on her arm, she looked radiant, triumphant, and utterly malicious. She stopped at our table, the skirt of her gown brushing against my leg. "Hey, sis," she chirped, her voice bright and loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables. "How is everything back here? I hope you do not mind the seating arrangements. We had so many VIPs coming in from New York for Brad that we had to squeeze people in where we could." She did not look sorry. She looked delighted. She looked like a cat playing with a mouse that had already been crippled. I stared at her, taking in the diamonds around her neck, the professional makeup, the veneer of perfection that covered the rotting financial foundation she was standing on. "It is fine, Chloe," I said, my voice flat. "It is exactly what I expected from you," Brad laughed, looping an arm around her waist. "You know, it is actually a prime spot," he said, gesturing to the restroom door just behind us. I looked at the door, then back at them, confused for a split second before the cruelty of his implication landed. "I mean, think about it." Brad continued a smirk, twisting his face. "It is convenient for Jamal. If one of the toilets backs up, he is right there to handle it. No commute time. He can jump right into action with his plunger." The guests at the nearest table erupted in laughter. It was a sharp barking sound that echoed in the corner. Chloe giggled, leaning into her husband as if he had just told the wittiest joke in the world. "Oh, stop it, Brad," she said, playfully slapping his chest. "You are terrible. But honestly, Maya, he has a point. You know how old the plumbing is in this hotel. It gives me peace of mind, knowing we have a professional right next to the bathroom just in case." She looked down at Jamal, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You do not mind, do you, Jamal? Being on call on my wedding day. It is the least you could do after showing up to my engagement dinner looking like a janitor." Jamal slowly stood up. He towered over them, his broad shoulders filling the small space. In his simple suit, he looked more dignified, more powerful than Brad ever would in his expensive tuxedo. "I am always happy to help," Jamal said, his voice low and devoid of anger. "I know how messy things can get when people try to flush things that do not belong in the system. Things always have a way of coming back up, Chloe, usually when you least expect it." The smile faltered on Chloe's face for a second. She did not understand his meaning, but she felt the weight of it. She felt the shift in the air, the sudden realization that the man she was mocking was not afraid of her. Whatever she scoffed, turning away. "Just try not to make a scene. The speeches are starting soon, and I do not want anyone distracted by the smell from this corner." She swept away, trailing white silk and the scent of expensive perfume. Brad lingered for a second longer, shooting us one last arrogant grin, before following his wife. I sat back down, my hands trembling in my lap. They were so confident, so sure of their superiority, they thought they had buried us in this corner under the weight of their wealth and their scorn. But they did not know that I held the match that would burn their kingdom down. They did not know that Jamal's phone was currently recording the entire interaction. They did not know that in less than 48 hours, the very plumbing they mocked would be the only thing standing between their parents and a frozen death. "Eat the bread roll," Jamal said, sliding his own roll onto my plastic plate. "You are going to need your strength." "Maya, the show is just getting started." I looked at the dry roll, then at the man I loved. I took a bite. It tasted like cardboard, but I swallowed it down. It was fuel. Fuel for the fire that was about to consume everything they thought they owned. The reception had descended into that chaotic hour where the open bar transforms dignified guests into sloppy caricatures of themselves, and the veneer of high society begins to crack under the weight of too much champagne. The DJ was blasting a bass-heavy track that rattled the silverware on our wobbly corner table, but even the music could not drown out the raucous laughter coming from the center of the room. Brad was holding court near the dance floor, a bottle of vintage Cabernet in one hand and a half-empty glass in the other. He had shed his tuxedo jacket somewhere between the speeches and the cake cutting, revealing a shirt that was already untucked and stained with sweat. He looked less like a Wall Street prodigy and more like a frat boy on a bender. But my parents were still looking at him with adoring eyes, laughing at his jokes as if he were delivering sermons from the Mount. I watched him scan the room, his eyes glassy and unfocused, until they landed on us, tucked away in the shadows by the service entrance. A cruel grin spread across his face. He said something to my sister, who giggled and pushed him playfully in our direction. "Here he comes," I whispered to Jamal, my stomach tightening. "He is drunk, and he is looking for a fight." Jamal did not turn around. He kept his eyes on me, his expression calm. "Just let him come, Maya. He is just noise." Brad weaved through the tables, navigating the obstacle course of chairs and dancing guests with the exaggerated care of someone trying very hard not to fall. He held the wine glass out in front of him like a weapon, the dark red liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. When he reached our table, he didn't stop. He stumbled forward, his foot catching on the leg of my chair, and for a second I thought it was an accident. But then I saw his wrist flick. It was a subtle movement, calculated and malicious. The contents of his glass launched through the air in a perfect crimson arc, splashing directly onto Jamal's chest. The wine soaked into his simple black suit, instantly staining the white shirt underneath and dripping down onto his lap. The smell of fermented grapes and alcohol filled our small corner, overpowering the scent of the industrial air freshener from the bathroom. "Oops," Brad slurred, steadying himself against the table heavily. His breath smelled sour. "Oh man, I am so sorry. Jamal, I did not see you there. You blend into the shadows so well." He laughed, a loud barking sound that drew the attention of the surrounding tables. Guests turned their heads, their eyes widening as they took in the scene. The plumber covered in wine, the groom looming over him. The tension was electric. Jamal sat perfectly still, the wine dripped from his chin onto his tie. He did not flinch, he did not gasp. He just slowly reached for the napkin on the table and began to dab at the mess with deliberate, methodical movements. "You know," Brad continued, his voice rising so that more people would hear, "since you are already wet and dirty, I have a job for you." Brad reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $100 bill. He slapped it onto the wet tablecloth, right next to Jamal's hand. "The men's room is backed up," Brad announced loudly, gesturing behind us with the empty wine glass. Someone dropped a massive load in there and the toilet one to flush. "It is disgusting water everywhere since you are here. And you are, a professional. Why don't you go handle that for us?" The room erupted. It wasn't just a few giggles, it was a wave of laughter that rolled across the ballroom. My father chuckled, shaking his head as if Brad was just being a rascal. My mother covered her mouth to hide her smile, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. Chloe actually clapped her hands, delighting in the spectacle. I felt the heat rise in my face, burning hot and fierce. This was it. The absolute bottom. The moment they decided we were not just less than them, but that we were their servants, their entertainment, I stood up, ready to scream, ready to flip the table, ready to tear Brad apart with my bare hands. But Jamal's hand shot out and gripped my wrist, gentle but firm. He stopped me without looking up. "Sit down, Maya," he said softly. He finished wiping his face, then folded the wine-stained napkin and placed it neatly on the table beside the money. Then he stood up. Jamal is 6'3" with shoulders built from years of physical labor. But tonight he seemed even bigger. He unfolded his frame, slowly rising until he towered over Brad, who suddenly looked very small and very soft in his expensive sweat-stained shirt. The laughter in the room died down. The music seemed to fade into the background. The air grew heavy and still. Jamal did not shout. He did not puff out his chest. He just looked at Brad. His eyes were dark and cold, void of any emotion except a terrifying clarity. It was the look of a man who had built empires, who had negotiated with government officials, who had solved problems far more complex than a drunken bully. It was the look of a man who knew exactly how much power he held, and exactly when to use it. Brad's smirk faltered. He took a half step back, his arrogance cracking under the weight of that silent stare. He looked around for support, but the guests had gone quiet, sensing the shift in dynamic. "You think this is funny, Brad?" Jamal asked, his voice low and smooth like gravel rolling over velvet. Brad swallowed hard, trying to regain his bravado. "It is a joke, man. Relax. Go clean the toilet. Earn your keep." Jamal took a step forward, invading Brad's personal space. He leaned down until his face was inches from Brad's ear. The room held its breath, straining to hear what he would say. I could hear it clearly, though, because I was frozen right beside them. "Keep the money, Brad," Jamal whispered. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. "You are going to need it tomorrow to buy a bus ticket." Brad blinked, confusion warring with fear on his face. "What?" "When the sun comes up," Jamal continued, his voice dropping even lower, just for Brad's ears. "Your accounts will be frozen, your investors will be calling the police, and that penthouse you are renting, the locks are being changed at 9 a.m. sharp. You are going to need every single penny you can scrape together just to get out of this city before the indictments come down. So keep the 100, you are going to need it a lot more than I do." Brad's face went ash gray. The color drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like he was about to faint. He opened his mouth to speak, to laugh, to throw another insult, but nothing came out. He just stared at Jamal, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. Jamal straightened up and brushed an invisible speck of dust from his wine-soaked lapel. He looked at the $100 bill on the table, then back at Brad with a look of pure pity. "Enjoy your party, Brad," Jamal said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "It is the last one you will ever have." He turned to me and offered his arm, his stained sleeve impeccable in its gesture. "Ready to go." "Mrs. Wilson." I took his arm, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I looked at Brad, who was still standing there, frozen, the wineglass trembling in his hand. I looked at my parents, who were frowning, trying to figure out why the joke had stopped being funny. "I am ready," I said. We walked away, leaving the money on the table. We walked past the silent guests, past my confused sister, past the parents who had sold their home for a fraud. We walked out of the ballroom and into the cool lobby, the heavy doors swinging shut behind us, cutting off the noise and the smell of expensive lilies. Jamal did not look back. He did not wipe the wine from his shirt again. He wore it like a badge of honor, proof that he had walked through the fire and come out untouched. As we stepped out into the Chicago night, the cold air biting at our cheeks, I looked at him in awe. "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know about the bus ticket?" Jamal pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. "Because I bought the bus company this morning," he said simply. "And I saw his name on the no-fly list 10 minutes ago. The FBI is waiting for him at the airport. Maya. He has nowhere to go but the Greyhound station. And I wanted to make sure he had the fare." Laughed, a sound of pure release echoing in the empty street. The snow had started to fall again, covering the city in a blanket of white. Tomorrow the world would change. Tomorrow everything would be different. But for tonight, we had won. And Brad was holding a $100 bill that was about to become his entire net worth. The silence that falls over Chicago during a polar vortex is deceptive. It looks peaceful, a world wrapped in white cotton wool. But underneath the stillness, the city is screaming. The temperature had plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. A cold so profound it turned breath into ice crystals before it even left your lips. The wind coming off Lake Michigan wasn't just a breeze, it was a physical assault. a knife made of air that sought out every crack, every seam, every weakness. 1 week after the disaster of my sister's wedding, the city was in lockdown. Schools were closed. Trains were delayed because the tracks had literally frozen, and people were advised not to leave their homes, unless it was a matter of life or death. In our small bungalow, Jamal and I were perfectly comfortable. The smart heating system he had installed, the one my parents had mocked as a waste of money, was humming efficiently, keeping the house at a steady 70 degrees. We had hot cocoa, we had thick blankets, and we had the peace of knowing we were prepared. But 5 miles away in the historic district, my parents were learning a very expensive lesson about priorities. For years, my father Desmond had neglected the infrastructure of their Victorian home. To the naked eye, the house was a masterpiece of crown molding and expensive wallpaper. But behind the walls, the pipes were ancient rusting iron that had not been updated since the 1950s. Whenever the furnace rattled or a radiator hissed, my mother, Patricia, would wave it off, saying they would get to it next year, but next year never came. Instead, the money meant for maintenance went into country club memberships, luxury cars, and, finally, the $300,000 wedding that was supposed to secure their social standing. The disaster started at 2 in the morning. My mother told me later that it sounded like a gunshot. The main water line in the basement, weakened by decades of neglect and subjected to the brutal expansion of freezing water, finally gave up. It burst with a violence that shook the floorboards. Within minutes, the basement was filling with freezing water. The furnace, which sat on a low platform, was submerged. The pilot light hissed and died. The heart of the house stopped beating. Upstairs, the radiators went cold. The temperature inside began to drop rapidly, matching the Arctic conditions outside. My father, in his silk pajamas, waded into the basement trying to find the shutoff valve. But the valve was seized with rust, frozen solid in the icy water. He slipped and fell, soaking himself in near-freezing sludge. By the time he scrambled back up the stairs, his lips were blue and his hands were shaking so hard he could not dial the phone. They huddled in the living room, wrapped in every coat and blanket they owned, watching their breath form clouds in the air of their own home. The water in the basement continued to rise, a silent, freezing tide that threatened to swallow the foundation. They started calling plumbers. They called every emergency number in the phone book. But this was Chicago in a record-breaking storm. Every pipe in the city was bursting. Every furnace was struggling. No one was answering. And the few who did laughed when my father demanded immediate service. "We have a 3-day wait list," Mr. Wilson, a dispatcher, told him. "Stay warm." Desperate, they played their ace card. They called Chloe. Surely their golden child, the daughter they had bankrupted themselves for, would take them in. Surely Brad, with his penthouse and his millions, would have a guest suite where they could wait out the storm. I can only imagine the conversation. My mother shivering in her mink coat, holding the phone, with numb fingers begging her daughter for sanctuary. But Chloe did not say, "Come over." Chloe did not say, "Send a car." "Oh, Mom, I wish we could," Chloe said, her voice tinny and distracted on the line. "But we are actually dealing with a bit of a situation here ourselves. The penthouse is, well, it is under emergency renovation. The fumes are toxic. Brad says we cannot have anyone here. It is an insurance liability." It was a lie. A clumsy, panicked lie. The truth, which I already knew, thanks to Jamal's connections, was that the locks on the penthouse had been changed 2 days ago. Brad's assets had been frozen just as Jamal predicted, and they were currently squatting in a cheap motel near the airport, trying to figure out how to flee the country without credit cards. But my parents didn't know that. They just knew that their daughter, the one who had received everything, was leaving them to freeze. By dawn, the inside of my parents' house was 10 degrees. The water in the toilet bowls had frozen solid. The parquet floors in the hallway were buckling from the moisture rising from the basement. The house they had prized above all else, The symbol of their status was turning into an ice tomb. That was when my phone rang. I was in the kitchen making pancakes with Jamal. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the warm air, a stark contrast to the misery unfolding across town. I saw my mother's name on the caller ID, and I hesitated. "Let it go to voicemail," Jamal said, flipping a pancake. He knew they were in trouble. He had seen the weather reports and knew the age of their plumbing. He had predicted this exact scenario months ago. "I cannot," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "If they are calling this early, it is bad." I picked up the phone, expecting tears, expecting an apology, expecting a humble request for help. Instead, I got a demand. "Maya, put your husband on the phone." My mother's voice was shrill, tight with cold and panic, but the arrogance was still there, frozen in place, like her pipes. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked. "What is going on?" "We are freezing to death. That is what is going on. The furnace is dead. The basement is a lake. We called everyone. Nobody is coming. Brad and Chloe are having renovations done, so we cannot go there." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "You need to send Jamal over here right now. He is a plumber, isn't he? This is what he does. Tell him to bring his tools and whatever parts he needs, and tell him to hurry. Your father can barely feel his feet." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, looking at Jamal in his flannel pajamas, drinking coffee in our warm kitchen. "Mom, it is 30 below zero outside. The roads are dangerous. You want him to drive across the city in a blizzard to fix a system you refused to maintain for 20 years. "This is not a debate, Maya," she snapped. "This is a family emergency. He is sitting there doing nothing while we are suffering. It is the least he can do. After the way he humiliated us at the wedding, after he ruined Chloe's reception with his little scene, he owes us. He owes you," I repeated, my voice rising. "He warned you, Mom. He told you the infrastructure was failing. You laughed at him. You called him a grease monkey. I don't care what I called him. Just get him over here. And Maya, make sure he knows this is a favor. We are not paying him. Consider it his way of making amends for embarrassing this family. Maybe if he fixes the heat, we can forgive him for being who he is." She did not ask, she ordered. She did not offer to pay. She demanded free labor as a penance for existing. She wanted the man she despised to save her life, but she wanted him to do it on his knees. I looked at Jamal. He was watching me, his expression calm. He could hear every word through the phone. He set down his coffee mug and walked over to me. He did not look angry. He looked resigned. "Hand me the phone," he said softly. I handed it to him. My mother was still ranting on the other end, listing the damages, complaining about the cold. "Patricia," Jamal said, his voice cutting through her tirade. "This is Jamal." "Finally," she huffed. "Get in your truck. The back door is unlocked because the lock is frozen. Just come straight to the basement and try not to track mud on the carpets upstairs." "I am not coming, Patricia," Jamal said. There was a silence on the line so profound I thought the call had dropped. "Excuse me," she whispered. "I am not coming over to fix your pipes," Jamal repeated. "I am not a repairman. You can summon because you are too cheap to pay for maintenance and too proud to admit you were wrong. I am your son-in-law, the one you banned from sitting on your furniture, the one you mocked, the one Brad threw money at." "You listen to me," she screeched, desperation cracking her voice. "You will come over here, or so help me. God, I will." "You will? What?" Jamal asked calmly. "You will not invite me to the country club. You will talk about me behind my back. You already do that. Patricia, you have nothing to threaten me with. And frankly, it is dangerous out there. I am not risking my safety for people who would not spit on me if I was on fire." "Jamal, please." My mother's voice broke, finally crumbling into something resembling begging. "It is so cold I cannot feel my fingers. We are going to die in here. Jamal looked at me. His eyes were hard, but I saw the conflict. He was a good man. A man who fixed things. A man who saved people. But he was also a man who had boundaries. I am not coming to fix the pipes, he said firmly. But I am not a monster. If you want to live, you leave the house. Get in your car and drive here. You can stay in our guest room. It is warm, but I am not stepping foot in that house to save your property. The house can freeze, Patricia. You chose the wedding over the roof over your heads. Now you have to live with that choice. He hung up the phone and placed it gently on the counter. They are coming, I asked. They have no choice, he said, turning back to the stove. But when they get here, Maya, they are going to see things. They are going to see the truth, and I don't think they are ready for it. He was right. They were about to walk into the lion's den, but they weren't the lions anymore. They were the prey, and the house they had mocked, the bungalow they had sneered at, was about to reveal its secrets. Despite what he said on the phone, Jamal is a man who cannot walk away when lives are actually at risk. After he hung up, my mother called back 3 more times, shrieking that the garage door was frozen shut, and the electric gate at the end of the driveway had shorted out. They were trapped in their ice fortress, prisoners of their own security measures and the sub-zero temperatures. I watched Jamal pack his truck, his movements efficient and angry. He grabbed the heavy-duty thermal pipe wrap, the industrial blowtorches, and the emergency valves. He did not look at me. He just put on his heavy parka and pulled his beanie low over his ears. I am doing this, so you do not have to plan a funeral in the snow, he said, his voice tight. But I am not doing it for them. The drive to the historic district was a white-knuckle nightmare. The streets were unplowed, sheets of black ice hidden under drifting snow. We passed 3 cars in ditches, their hazard lights blinking like weak pulses in the storm. When we finally pulled up to my parents' wrought iron gate, Jamal had to use a crowbar to pry the mechanism open just so we could drive through. My father met us at the front door, bundled in a cashmere coat and a silk scarf, looking like a captain going down with his ship, but refusing to let go of the wheel. He did not say, "Thank you." He did not offer coffee. He just pointed toward the kitchen door. "Get downstairs. The water is rising." The basement was a catastrophe. The water that had flooded the floor earlier had begun to freeze, creating a slushy lagoon of ice and sewage. The air was so cold it burned my lungs. Jamal waded in his waterproof boots, crunching through the semi-frozen layer. He moved with the precision of a surgeon inspecting the main line, checking the pressure valves, and examining the furnace that sat silent and dark in the corner. My parents stood at the top of the stairs, hovering like anxious vultures. My mother was holding a flashlight, her hand shaking so bad the beam danced across the ceiling beams. "Well," my father demanded, his voice echoing in the cold stairwell. "How long will it take? Just patch it up so we can get the heat back on. We have guests coming next week." Jamal stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at the rusted iron of the main intake pipe, then at the cracked casing of the furnace. He took a deep breath and turned to face them. "It is not a patch job, Desmond," Jamal said, using my father's first name, which made my father flinch. "The entire system is shot. The iron is corroded all the way through. The pressure from the freeze blew out the main junction and the furnace heat exchanger is cracked. If I turn the gas back on now, this house will not heat up. It will blow up. So fix it," my mother snapped. "That is why you are here, isn't it?" "I can fix it," Jamal said calmly. "But I cannot patch it. I have to replace the main line and install a new emergency boiler, just to get the house livable again. I have the parts in my warehouse, but I will need to call a crew to help me haul them in through this storm." "Fine." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Just do it. Send me the bill later." Jamal crossed his arms. "We need to talk about the bill now. The parts are industrial grade. The labor is hazard pay because of the blizzard. And given the state of the rest of the plumbing, this is a full extraction." He paused, looking them dead in the eye. "It is going to be $20,000, and I need half up front for materials." The silence that followed was louder than the howling wind outside. My father's face went from pale to a deep violent shade of purple. The vein in his forehead bulged as if it were about to burst. $20,000, he sputtered. You are out of your mind. You are trying to rob us. It is the standard rate for an emergency system replacement. In a blizzard, Jamal said, his voice remaining steady. Actually, I am giving you the family discount. Any other contractor would charge you 30 grand, and they wouldn't be able to get here until next week. Liar, my mother screamed from the top of the stairs. You are a liar and a thief. You think because we are in a bind you can extort us. You are trying to get back at us for the wedding, aren't you? This is your petty revenge. It is not revenge, Patricia. It is the cost of parts, Jamal said, reaching into his pocket to pull out his phone. I can show you the supplier invoice right now. My father stormed down the stairs, slipping on the wet concrete, but catching himself on the railing. He marched up to Jamal, getting right in his face. I know what this is. You see a big house and you see dollar signs. You think we are made of money, so you pad the bill. You are just like every other grifter from the South Side, trying to hustle your betters. Jamal's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign that his patience was evaporating. I am not hustling you, Desmond. I am trying to keep your pipes from exploding, but if you do not want to pay for the work, I can leave. You are damn right. You will leave, my father shouted. He looked around wildly, then grabbed Jamal's heavy tool bag, which was sitting on a dry patch of concrete. He hefted it up, grunting with the effort, and staggered toward the back door. He kicked the door open, letting a blast of snow and freezing wind tear into the basement. Get out, he screamed, hurling the heavy bag into the snowdrift outside. The tools clattered and sank into the white void. We do not need your charity, and we certainly do not need your scams. I would rather freeze to death than let you cheat me out of a single dime. Dad? Stop, I yelled, rushing forward. You are making a mistake. He is the only one who can help you. My father spun on me, his eyes wild with the madness of a man who knows he is losing control but refuses to admit it. You are in on it too, aren't you? You brought him here to humiliate us, to make us beg. Well, I am not begging. Go back to your shack, Maya. Take your con artist husband with you. We will find a real professional, someone who knows their place. Jamal walked past my father without a word. He stepped out into the blizzard and calmly retrieved his tool bag from the snow. He brushed the flakes off the leather and slung it over his shoulder. He looked back at the house, at the water freezing on the floor, at my parents shivering in their expensive coats, at the steam rising from their angry breath. Good luck, Desmond, Jamal said, his voice cutting through the wind. You are going to need it. He turned and walked toward the truck, his boots leaving deep tracks in the snow. I looked at my parents one last time. My mother was hugging herself, rocking back and forth. My father was slamming the back door shut, trying to keep out the cold he had just invited in. You just made the biggest mistake of your lives, I told them, my voice shaking, not from cold but from rage. Just go, my father shouted through the glass of the door. Go! I turned and ran to the truck, jumping into the passenger seat. Jamal already had the engine running, the heater blasting. Are you okay? I asked, reaching for his hand. He looked at the house, dark and looming against the gray sky. I am fine, Maya, he said, shifting the truck into gear. But that house is a tomb, and they just locked themselves inside. As we drove away, the snow erased our tracks, leaving my parents alone in their mansion, which was rapidly becoming a very expensive freezer. They thought they had stood up to a scammer. They thought they had protected their pride. But as we turned the corner, I checked the weather report. The temperature was expected to drop another 10 degrees by midnight. They had thrown out the only man who could save them, and now the cold was coming for them, and it would not be as polite as Jamal. 2 days after my father threw Jamal's tools into the snow, the temperature inside my parents' mansion had dropped to 5 degrees below zero. The house was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum of ice. The windows were frosted over on the inside, creating a blinding white tomb effect that trapped the cold within. The water in the toilets had frozen solid, cracking the porcelain bowls with a sound like pistol shots. The hardwood floors my mother had prized so dearly were warped and buckled from the moisture that had seeped up from the basement, which was now a solid block of frozen sewage. My parents had retreated to the library, the smallest room in the house, trying to conserve body heat. They were huddled together on the leather Chesterfield wrapped in every duvet, mink coat, and cashmere throw they owned. In the center of the room, they had built a makeshift fire in the decorative fireplace. My father was feeding it, not with logs but with books. First editions, leather-bound classics, the knowledge of centuries going up in smoke, just to keep their fingers from turning black from frostbite. I watched them. Through the FaceTime call my mother had initiated, her hand shaking so violently the image blurred Maya. "Please," she whispered, her lips blue and cracked. "We are dying in here. The generator is almost out of fuel. No one will come. The roads are still blocked. We have eaten nothing but crackers for 2 days." I sat in my warm kitchen, a mug of hot tea in my hand, feeling a strange detachment. This was the woman who had mocked my home, who had stolen my savings, who had left me on a curb. Now she was begging me for salvation through a pixelated screen. "I sent you the number for the emergency shelter, Mom," I said calmly. "The National Guard is evacuating people in your district. You just have to walk to the corner." "We cannot walk," my father croaked from beneath a pile of blankets. "It is too cold. We will freeze before we make it to the gate. Besides, we cannot leave the house unguarded. Looters! Looters!" I almost laughed. "Dad, your house is a block of ice. No one is looting a freezer. You need to leave," we called. "Chloe?" My mother interrupted, desperation in her eyes. "She is coming," she said. "Brad rented a helicopter. He is going to airlift us out to their private island. We just have to wait for them." I stared at her. The delusion was so complete it was almost admirable. Even as she burned books to survive, she clung to the fantasy of her golden daughter, S. "Rescue Mom," I said gently. "Brad does not have a helicopter. Brad does not have an island. He does." My father insisted, his voice gaining a shred of its old arrogance. He showed me the brochure. "He is a man of means, unlike your husband who abandons his family in a blizzard." I was about to tell them the truth, about to shatter their last hope, when the sound of the front door crashing open echoed through their phone. The camera jerked as my mother dropped it, and I heard screaming. "Mom! Dad!" It was Chloe. But she did not sound like a savior. She sounded like a wounded animal. I watched the screen, which was now angled toward the ceiling, as Chloe burst into the library. She was not wearing her designer ski gear. She was wearing a torn coat over her pajamas, and she was sobbing hysterically. "Chloe," my mother gasped, scrambling up from the couch. "Where is Brad? Where is the helicopter?" "He is gone," Chloe wailed, collapsing onto the floor. "He is gone, Mom. He took everything." "What do you mean, gone?" my father demanded, throwing off his blankets and standing up, shaking. "He left me," Chloe screamed, pounding her fists on the frozen floor. "He left me at the motel. He took the cash from the wedding, the checks, the jewelry, and he took the money from the house loan, all of it. He cleared out the accounts while I was sleeping." My father staggered back, hitting the bookshelf. He held onto it for support, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. "The house money," he whispered. "The 300,000 gone." Chloe sobbed. "He transferred it to an offshore account. The police said he is not even Brad. There is no Brad. His name is Gary. He is wanted in 3 states for fraud. He is a con artist." "Dad, he played us." The silence in the library was heavier than the cold. My parents stood there, the truth finally piercing through their arrogance. The man they had worshipped, the man they had chosen over me, the man they had bet their entire future on was a thief, and they had handed him the keys to their destruction. My mother sank back onto the couch, her eyes vacant. "He said he was a traitor. He had a penthouse. It was an Airbnb, Chloe cried. He rented it for the month with a stolen credit card. The cars were leased. The watches were fake. Everything was fake. Mom, we have nothing. The hotel kicked me out because the card was declined. I had to walk here in the snow. I watched them from my kitchen, thousands of dollars worth of technology, humming around me, keeping me warm and safe. I watched their world implode, and I felt nothing but a cold, finalizing click in my chest. This was it. The rock bottom. Just then, the generator outside their house must have surged one last time because the massive television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. It was tuned to Good Morning America, the volume preset to loud breaking news. The anchor announced, her voice cheerful and bright. In a stunning turn of events, Chicago's infrastructure crisis has been averted thanks to the intervention of a mysterious benefactor. My parents and Chloe looked up, drawn by the light and the noise. They stared at the screen, their faces illuminated by the glow. The broadcast cut to a live feed from downtown Chicago. A man was standing in front of a bank of microphones flanked by the mayor and the governor. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit that fit him like armor. He looked powerful, confident, and undeniably regal, but it was not a stranger. It was Jamal. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Chloe stopped crying, her jaw dropping open. My father squinted at the screen as if trying to bring the image into focus. "Is that?" my father whispered. "Is that the plumber? This man?" The anchor continued. "Identified only as the founder of Hydrotech Solutions, has donated $5 million in emergency funds and deployed his private fleet of advanced repair crews to restore heat and water to the city's most critical districts. He is being hailed as the hero of the freeze." The camera zoomed in on Jamal's face. He looked directly into the lens, and for a second, I felt like he was looking right at them, right into their frozen library. "We build things to last," Jamal said, his voice deep and resonant, echoing through their cold house. "We do not cut corners, and we do not leave people behind, even when they do not deserve it." The screen cut back to the anchor. "But who is this mystery billionaire?" Sources say. "He started his company from a garage in the South Side, building it into a global empire while remaining completely anonymous until today." My mother looked at the phone, which was still broadcasting their misery to me. She picked it up, her hands trembling violently. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Is that your husband?" I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. "Yes, Mom," I said, calm and clear. "That is my husband. The grease monkey. The nobody. The man you threw out into the snow." She stared at me, her eyes wide with horror and realization. She looked at the TV where Jamal was shaking hands with the governor, then back at her ruined house, her sobbing daughter, and her broken husband. "Oh my God," she moaned, the sound rising from the depths of her soul. "What have we done?" "You bet on the wrong horse, Mom," I said. "And now the race is over." I hung up the phone, cutting the connection, leaving them in the cold with the image of the man they despised saving the city they lived in, while they froze in the ruins of their own hubris. The TV blared on a beacon of light in their dark room, mocking them with the truth they had been too blind to see. The flickering light of the television was the only source of warmth in the library, a cold blue glow that cast long, dancing shadows against the frosted bookshelves. My parents and Chloe were huddled together under a mound of blankets, their breath rising in unison like smoke signals of distress. The generator outside sputtered, coughing its last few breaths of fuel, but the screen remained bright, a window into a world that was functioning warm and alive. The news anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a grave expression, leaned into the camera. "Breaking news from downtown Chicago, where a press conference is underway. The mayor is standing alongside the governor to announce a historic partnership that promises to end this infrastructure nightmare once and for all." My father squinted, his eyes watering from the cold and the strain. "Who cares?" he muttered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Unless they are bringing heaters to this house, I do not care." "Shh," my mother hissed, leaning forward. "There is something happening. Look at the chyron." At the bottom of the screen, the bold letters scrolled by Hydrotech Solutions pledges, $5 billion infrastructure overhaul, CEO reveals identity to lead crisis response. $5 billion. Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. $5 billion. Who has that kind of money? The camera pulled back to reveal a podium set up in the grand lobby of City Hall. The space was crowded with reporters, flashing cameras, and serious-looking officials in heavy coats. But in the center of it all, standing next to the mayor, was a man who seemed to generate his own gravity. He was not wearing a parka. He was not wearing the heavy blue coveralls that my family had sneered at for months. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was cut so precisely it looked like a second skin. The fabric shimmered slightly under the television lights, a bespoke Tom Ford masterpiece that cost more than the engagement ring Brad had stolen from Chloe. He wore no tie, his crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, projecting an air of effortless authority that made the politicians around him look stiff and uncomfortable. My mother gasped, a sound that seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his cashmere coat. "Desmond," she wheezed, "look at him. Look at his face." My father leaned in, his glasses fogging up. He wiped them with a trembling hand and stared. "It cannot be," he whispered. "It is impossible." But it was undeniable. The camera zoomed in, capturing the sharp angle of the jaw, the intense intelligence in the dark eyes, the calm set of the shoulders. It was Jamal, the man they had banned from their furniture, the man they had thrown out into a blizzard, the man they had called a grease monkey and a failure. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor spoke, his voice booming through the television speakers. "I am proud to introduce the man who has single-handedly financed the emergency response teams that are currently thawing out our city, the founder and CEO of Hydrotech Solutions, a man who has operated in the shadows, building the very veins of this city until today, Mr. Jamal Wilson." Jamal stepped up to the microphone. He did not look nervous. He looked like a titan who had finally decided to step off Mount Olympus and deal with the mortals. He placed his hands on the podium, hands that I knew were rough and calloused, but now looked strong and capable. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," Jamal said, his voice deep and resonant, the same voice that had asked my father for permission to marry me, only to be laughed at. "We are facing a crisis of neglect. For too long, this city, like many homes, has ignored the foundation in favor of the facade. We painted over the cracks and hoped for the best. But the cold has a way of revealing the truth." My mother let out a low keen, a sound of pure psychological pain. "He is talking about us," she moaned. "He is talking about the house." Jamal continued, his gaze sweeping across the press corps. "We have deployed 400 emergency crews across the tri-state area. We are replacing main lines, upgrading filtration systems, and ensuring that no citizen of Chicago has to choose between warmth and water tonight. This is a $5 billion investment in our future, and it is just the beginning." A reporter shouted a question from the crowd. "Mr. Wilson, you have been notoriously private. Why come forward now? Why reveal yourself today?" Jamal looked directly into the camera, and in that moment, the distance between the television station and my parents frozen. Library evaporated. He was looking right at them, right at the people who had judged him by his work boots. "Because I learned recently that silence can be mistaken for weakness," Jamal said, his voice hardening slightly. "I learned that if you do not define your own value, others will try to discount it. I am a plumber at heart. I built this company from the ground up, starting with a single wrench and a van. I am not ashamed of the dirt under my fingernails because that dirt built an empire." Chloe began to shake her head, back and forth, a rhythmic denial of reality. No, she whimpered. No, 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 he is a nobody. He fixes toilets. He cannot be a billionaire. He cannot be the one who saves us. The reporter asked another question. Mr. Wilson, you built this technology, this empire virtually alone. Is there anyone you credit with your success? Jamal's expression softened. The hard edge of the CEO melted away, and for a brief second, he was just my husband. The man who made me pancakes and held me when I cried. I did not build it alone, he said softly. I had an architect, a partner who saw the blueprint of what this could be when it was just a dream. She is the one who believed in me when I had nothing. She is the one who reminded me that true worth is not what you wear or where you live, but what you build. She is the reason I am standing here today. He paused, and a small private smile touched his lips. My wife, Maya. She is the smartest person I know, and she is the only reason I have not given up on this city. The camera cut away to a shot of the repair crews, mobilized in the streets. Trucks, emblazoned with the Hydrotech logo rolling out like an army of salvation, the screen filled with images of pipes being fixed, of heat returning to homes, of families cheering. But in the library, there was no cheering. There was only the sound of a world shattering. Chloe scrambled up from the floor, her eyes wide and manic. She pointed a shaking finger at the television screen where Jamal's face was frozen in a graphic next to the headline, Chicago's Savior. That is Jamal, she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. That is the plumber. That is the guy Brad threw money at. That is the guy Mom wouldn't let sit on the couch. Why is he on TV? Why does it say $5 billion? My father sat back on the couch, his face gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his life savings burn, which in a way he had. He had bet everything on appearance, on status, on the lie that Brad represented, and he had thrown away the reality that Jamal offered. We threw him out, he whispered, his voice trembling. Threw a billionaire out of our house because he asked for $20,000 to save our lives. My mother was rocking back and forth, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. Oh my God, she repeated over and over. Oh my God, we insulted him. We treated him like garbage, and he owns the city. Chloe turned on them, her grief over Brad morphing into a new target. Rage. You told me he was a loser. You told me. Maya settled. You said her wedding was a joke. You said I was the one who won. We thought he was my mother. Sobbed. We judged him. We judged the book by the cover. And now look at us, Chloe shrieked, spinning around the freezing room. We are dying in a library, burning books while Maya's husband is on television saving the world. He could have saved us. He was right here in the basement, and you chased him away with a shovel. I did not know, my father roared, standing up, his frustration finally boiling over. I did not know he was worth billions. How was I supposed to know? He dresses like a workman. He drives a truck. It was a trick. They tricked us. They did not trick us, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. They just tested us, and we failed. We failed so hard, Dad. The generator outside gave one final heave and died. The lights on the television flickered and went black, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long, skeletal shadows against the walls. The silence returned heavier than before, colder than before. They were alone in the dark, trapped in the ruin of their own making, and the only man who could have pulled them out was the man they had spent a year spitting on. My mother's phone, which was lying on the table, lit up the dark room. It buzzed once, twice. It was a notification from the bank, a final alert that the mortgage payment was overdue and the accounts were empty. But she did not look at it. She just stared at the blank television screen, where moments ago, Jamal had stood like a king. What have we done? She whispered, into the darkness. What have we done to ourselves? And in the silence of the freezing house, the only answer was the sound of the wind howling outside, mocking them with the cold, hard truth they could no longer deny. The darkness in the library was absolute, save for the dying embers in the fireplace, but the silence was even heavier. It was the silence of a tomb of a life built on lies finally collapsing under its own weight. My parents sat frozen on the couch, not just from the sub-zero temperatures, but from the paralytic shock of the truth. The man they had treated like a servant was the king of the city. The man they had sneered at was the savior they had prayed for, and they had slammed the door in his face. My father stared at his hands, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He looked at my mother expecting comfort, expecting her to spin this into something manageable like she always did. But she was catatonic. Her eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on the blank television screen where Jamal's face had been just moments ago. The realization was not just a thought, it was a physical blow. They had thrown away a diamond because they did not like the box it came in. "We ruined everything," my father whispered, his voice cracking. "It wasn't just the money. It was the bridge. We burned the bridge while we were standing on it." Before my mother could respond, a new sound cut through the howling wind outside. It was the wail of sirens, shrill and piercing, getting louder by the second. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the frosted windows, turning the library into a disorienting nightmare of flashing colors. "They are here for us," Chloe whimpered, pulling her knees to her chest. "They are coming to take us away." The front door did not open. It exploded inwards, wood splintered and glass shattered as a battering ram forced the frozen lock. A team of tactical officers swarmed into the hallway, their flashlights cutting beams through the icy fog of the house. "Police search warrant." Nobody move. My father tried to stand up, his dignity kicking in on autopilot, even as his world disintegrated. "Officers, we are the victims here. We have been freezing for days. Sit down." An officer barked, shining a light in his face. "We are looking for Bradley Pellington. He was tracked to this location via his burner phone." "He is not here," my mother cried, her voice shrill. "He left us. He stole our money and ran. Check the basement," the lead officer commanded, ignoring her. 3 officers moved toward the kitchen, boots crunching on the warped floorboards. My parents exchanged confused glances. The basement was a frozen lake of sewage. Why would anyone be down there? Moments later, there was a scuffle, shouting, and the sound of splashing water. 2 officers emerged, dragging a man between them. He was soaking wet, covered in grime and shivering so violently his teeth were audible. It was Brad. He wasn't wearing his Italian suit anymore. He was wearing dirty sweats and a hoodie. He must have stolen from a laundry bin. Looked like a drowned rat, his hair matted to his skull, his eyes wild with panic. He had been hiding in the crawl space above the furnace, trying to wait out the storm and the police dragnet. "Brad." Chloe screamed, scrambling off the floor. "You thief! You liar! You left me at a motel!" Brad looked at her and sneered, his charm replaced by the feral look of a trapped animal. "Shut up, you idiot. I would have been halfway to Brazil if your father hadn't insisted on that stupid second mortgage. The paperwork triggered the SEC flags. You people are so desperate to be rich. You led the feds right to me. Officer, arrest this man," my father shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "He defrauded us. He stole my home equity." The lead officer walked over to Brad and snapped the handcuffs on his wrists, tightening them until Brad winced. Then he turned to my father, holding up a plastic bag containing a stack of documents they had pulled from Brad's jacket. "Desmond Wilson?" he asked. "Yes, that is me." My father straightened his spine, assuming he was being addressed as a victim. "You are under investigation for bank fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud," the officer stated calmly. My father's knees gave out and he collapsed back onto the couch. "What? That is impossible. I was investing." You signed loan documents that falsified your assets, the officer said, flipping through the wet papers. These applications claim you own properties you do not own and have income you do not have. You signed them. Mr. Wilson, your signature is on every page right next to his. Brad laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound that echoed in the cold room. They did not even read them, he told the officer. I put the papers in front of them, and they just signed. They were so greedy they didn't care what the fine print said. They just saw the dollar signs. They are not victims, they are accomplices. It is a lie, my mother shrieked, lunging toward Brad. I did not know I trusted you. You said you were a genius. You are the genius. Patricia Brad spat back. You mortgaged a house that was already underwater. You leveraged assets that did not exist. You wanted the lifestyle so bad, you were willing to commit felonies to get it. You are just like me, you just aren't as good at it. The officer signaled to his team. Take him in. We will sort out the rest at the station. As they dragged Brad out the front door, kicking and screaming, the lead officer turned back to my parents. This house is now a crime scene, he said. His voice was not unkind, but it was final. It is being seized as collateral against the fraudulent loans. The bank has already issued the foreclosure order, effective immediately. Foreclosure, my father whispered. You cannot do this. It is 30 degrees below zero. I cannot let you stay here, the officer said. It is unsafe, and it is no longer your property. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal effects. Then I have to seal the building. 5 minutes to pack 30 years of life, to pack the memories, the status, the identity they had built this house around. They scrambled around the library in a panic, grabbing things at random: a silver picture frame, a jewelry box, a handful of books. My mother grabbed her mink coat, clutching it like a life preserver. Get out, the officer ordered, checking his watch. Time is up. They were herded out into the night. The wind hit them like a physical blow, sucking the remaining heat from their bodies instantly. The snow was falling in thick, blinding sheets, covering the world in white. They stood on the sidewalk, shivering uncontrollably, watching as the police taped a bright orange notice to the front door of their Victorian mansion. The lights of the police cruisers faded as they drove away, with Brad leaving my family alone in the dark. They were homeless. They had no car because the garage was frozen shut, and the police had seized the keys as part of the investigation. They had no money because the accounts were frozen. They had no friends because they had alienated everyone with their arrogance. Chloe was sobbing quietly, her tears freezing on her cheeks. My father was staring at the house, his expression vacant, as if his mind had simply shut down to protect him from the horror. My mother looked around wildly. Her eyes landed on the house next door, where the neighbors had turned off their lights and ignored the commotion. She looked down the street, which was empty and buried in snow. We are going to die, she whispered. Her voice was carried away by the wind. We are actually going to die out here. Then she remembered. Her hand dove into the pocket of her mink coat and pulled out her phone. It had 12% battery left, barely enough for one call. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the contacts. She scrolled past her bridge club friends, who would not answer. She scrolled past the country club, which was closed. She scrolled past Troy, who had turned off his phone hours ago. She stopped at one name. The name she had slandered. The name she had mocked. The name of the daughter she had abandoned at an airport and ignored for years. Her fingers were stiff with cold, shaking so hard she could barely press the button. She put the phone to her ear, the plastic freezing against her skin. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Please, she begged, the wind tearing the words from her mouth. Please, pick up Maya. Please, Dawn. To be like us. The ringing continued, a lonely sound in the frozen night, the only lifeline left in a world they had burned to the ground. The silence in our penthouse was absolute, a luxurious blanket of quiet, that wrapped around us like the cashmere throw on the sofa. We were not in a drafty bungalow anymore. We were in the home Jamal had built for us, the one he had kept secret until the right moment. It was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above the city, overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering skyline. But inside, the air was warm, scented with cedar and amber from the fireplace that crackled softly in the corner. I sat on the velvet sofa, my legs tucked under me, watching the snow fall outside. It looked beautiful from up here, soft and romantic, harmless. But I knew the truth. I knew that down on the ground in the historic district, that same snow was burying the ruins of my parents' lives. My phone sat on the marble coffee table, vibrating against the stone. It had been buzzing for 20 minutes, a relentless, angry insect demanding attention. The screen lit up over and over again, illuminating the dark room with flashes of white light, 117 missed calls. The number seemed impossible. It was a testament to their desperation, a digital monument to their panic. They were calling from my mother's dying phone from numbers I did not recognize from the past. They had tried to erase. I reached out and picked it up. The metal was cool in my hand. I swiped open the notifications, and the messages flooded in, a tsunami of begging and bargaining. I began to read them aloud, my voice steady but quiet. Jamal sat beside me, his arm draped along the back of the sofa, his presence a solid weight against my side. He did not speak. He just listened, bearing witness to the collapse of the people who had tried to break him. "Maya, please pick up. It is Mom. We are outside. The police took the house. We have nowhere to go. It is freezing. Please, honey. We are family. You cannot let us die out here." That was the first one sent 10 minutes after I hung up on them. "Maya, I am sorry about the plumber comment. I did not know. He is a genius. We see that now. Tell him we are sorry. We can. We work something out. Just send a car. Please send a car." That was my father bargaining, even as he froze. "Sis, it is. Chloe. Brad ruined everything I did not know. I swear. I am a victim too. Do not punish me for his crimes. I need a place to stay. The shelter is full. They want us to sleep on cots." "Maya. I cannot sleep on a cot. I am your sister." I scrolled down, reading more. The tone shifted from panic to anger, then back to pathetic pleading. "We raised you. We gave you life. How can you be so cruel? We will sue you for elder abuse. This is neglect. Please, Maya. I am so cold I cannot feel my toes anymore. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just pick up the phone." I lowered the phone and looked at Jamal. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel the rush of victory, the vindication of seeing my tormentors brought low. They were finally understanding what it felt like to be helpless, to be judged, to be discarded. But I did not feel triumph. I felt a deep, hollow sadness. "They are pathetic," I whispered. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. They were hollow people, shells built of ego and greed, and now that the shell was cracked, there was nothing inside but fear. "They never loved us," Jamal said softly. He took the phone from my hand and looked at the screen, reading the desperate words of a woman who had called him a grease monkey only hours before. "They loved what we could do for them. And now that they have nothing, they are trying to consume us to survive." I looked out the window at the city lights. The world was so big, so full of possibility, and they were trapped in a tiny frozen hell of their own making. "I could send a car," I said. The thought was there, a reflex born of decades of conditioning, decades of being the fixer, the doormat, the good daughter. "You could," Jamal agreed. He did not tell me no. He did not forbid it. He gave me the power just as he always had. But ask yourself this. Maya, if the roles were reversed, if we were the ones freezing on the sidewalk and they were safe in this penthouse, would they send a car for us? The answer was immediate and visceral. No, they would close the drapes, they would turn up the music. They would say we should have planned better. They would say we deserved it. I looked at the phone one last time. The buzzing had stopped. My mother's battery must have finally died. The silence was heavy. Final. Jamal looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I took the phone back from him. I felt the weight of it, the weight of the connection that still tethered me to them. I thought about the wedding. I thought about the plastic plate of cold pasta. I thought about my father throwing Jamal's tools into the snow. I thought about the years of criticism, the neglect, the emotional abuse. "I want to finish it." I said. I opened the family group chat. The one named Wilson Family Excellence. The one they had used to mock me, to exclude me to plan a wedding. I wasn't welcome at. My fingers flew across the keyboard typing out the final words. Whatever say to them. I did not scream. I did not curse. I just typed the truth. I looked at the message one last time. It was perfect. It was the closure I needed. Send the message delivered instantly. I watched the little check mark appear, confirming that somewhere out there in the cold, a phone had received the verdict. Then I opened the settings menu one by one. I went through the contacts. Mom, Dad, Chloe Block, Block Block. I watched their names disappear from my phone, erased from my digital life, just as they had erased me from their real ones. It is done, I said, setting the phone down, face down on the table. Jamal pulled me into his arms, and we sat there in the silence, watching the snowfall covering the city, covering the past, covering the tracks of the people who used to be my family. The next morning I woke up to a world that was bright and clean. The storm had passed, leaving Chicago buried under a pristine layer of white. The sun was shining, reflecting off the lake in a blinding display of diamonds. I felt lighter. The heavy stone that had been sitting in my chest for years was gone, replaced by a sense of calm possibility. I did not have to wonder what happened to them. The news told me everything. Brad's arrest was the lead story. The footage of him being dragged out of my parents' house in handcuffs played on a loop. The reporters detailed his scheme, the millions he had stolen, the trail of fraud that spanned 3 states. He was facing 20 years in federal prison. My parents' fate was less public, but no less final. Through the grapevine of old neighbors, I heard the rest. The bank had seized the house, the foreclosure was absolute, the police had barred them from re-entering, allowing them only the clothes on their backs. They had spent the night in an emergency shelter, a gymnasium filled with cots and strangers, exactly the kind of place my mother had spent her life looking down on. They had no money. Their accounts were empty, drained by Brad or frozen by the investigation. They had no friends. The scandal had made them pariahs. The social circle they had sacrificed everything to impress had closed ranks and locked them out. My father, I heard, had tried to call his old golf buddies, begging for a loan. They stopped taking his calls. My mother had tried to go to her bridge club, but was asked to leave. They were moved to a state-run transitional housing facility, a small, cramped apartment in a neighborhood they would have previously refused to drive through. My father was looking for work, but at 65 with a ruined reputation and a pending investigation, options were slim. He was working as a greeter at a big box store, standing on his feet for 8 hours a day, forcing smiles at customers who did not know. He used to be a vice president. Chloe had the hardest fall. The golden child. The princess who was promised the world was now working double shifts as a waitress at a diner near the airport. She was living in a studio apartment with 3 roommates trying to pay off the debts Brad had put in her name. She had sold her designer clothes, her jewelry, even her car. She served coffee and eggs to travelers wearing a uniform that smelled of grease, a bitter echo of the life she had mocked me for living. As for the $20,000 I mentioned in my text, I kept my word. I sat at my desk in the penthouse, the morning sun warming my face, and logged into the bank account I had set up for the emergency repairs. The $20,000 was still there, untouched. I navigated to the website of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. It was a charity that provided shelter food and job training for families in crisis. Families who had lost everything. I typed in the donation amount. $20,000. In the field for dedication. I typed. In honor of Desmond and Patricia Wilson. May this help someone find the warmth you could not provide. I clicked Submit. The confirmation screen popped up and I felt a surge of satisfaction. It was the most expensive plumbing job in history, but it fixed something far more important than pipes. It fixed my soul. Jamal walked into the room holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked at the screen, then at me, and smiled. "You are a good woman, Maya," he said, handing me a glass. "Better than they deserved." I took the glass and walked out onto the balcony. The cold air was bracing, but I did not shiver. I was wearing a cashmere sweater Jamal had bought me, and I was standing on the terrace of my own home, a home built on love and respect and truth. We looked out over the city, the lake stretching out like a sheet of hammered silver. The world was vast and beautiful, and it was ours. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small plastic SIM card from my old phone. It held the old numbers, the old messages, the old life. It was a tiny piece of plastic, but it carried the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. I held it over the railing, my fingers hovering in the cold air. "Family is in T-blood," I said, my voice carried away by the wind. Family is who catches you when you fall. Family is who values you when you have nothing. Family is the people who stay. I looked at Jamal, the man who had stood by me when I was broken, the man who had built an empire with his hands, the man who loved me enough to let me fight my own battles. "You are my family," I said. I dropped the SIM card. It fell tumbling down, down, down until it disappeared into the icy gray water of Lake Michigan. It was gone, swallowed by the deep, never to be retrieved. I turned back to my husband and clinked my glass against his. "To us," I said. "To us," he replied. We drank the champagne, crisp and cold and sweet. We stood there high above the world, watching the city wake up, watching the future unfold. My parents were somewhere down there, living the reality they had created. My sister was serving tables, learning the value of $1 the hard way. Brad was in a cell contemplating his choices. But up here on the balcony, there was only peace. There was only love, and the absolute unshakable knowledge that I had won. Not because I had the money, not because I had the penthouse, but because I had found the one thing they could never buy. I had found my worth, and no one was ever going to take that away from me again. The most powerful lesson from Maya's journey is that true worth is never defined by a job title or a bank account. Her family's downfall wasn't just bad luck. It was the inevitable result of valuing status over love. They chased the illusion of wealth and lost the reality of connection. Meanwhile, Maya found her greatest treasure, a partner who valued her soul, not her utility, by looking past the surface. We must learn that family is defined by loyalty and respect, not DNA. When you stand in your truth, you never really lose. You only shed what was holding you back. If you believe that character matters more than status, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.